Okay. Uh, were there any questions from what we went over last week? Since we had a lousy connection, and I don't know how well people could hear, but were there anything that anyone had any questions about or anything?
Did you get my email about the lesson? I sent you a thing that I had found on the internet.
I did. Yes, I did. It was a little difficult because I could only get email on my phone and everything. So sometimes you can't see what you need to see on the phone.
Yeah, yeah. But I thought it was interesting for everybody who didn't get it. It was it to Jude? Is that who it was?
Yes.
Yeah. So they made the connection. We were talking last week about the connection to who was it last week, Jeff? I'm sorry.
Well,
No, you made the
a
connection
group or a person.
to the
Connection
Old
to
Testament reference.
Scotland and the Galatians, or what?
No, it wasn't the Galatians. But anyways,
It was the night.
Yeah, and so
Night.
this related it back to Jude, and it was really interesting. If anybody's interested, I could always send that link.
Okay. Well, I can attach it to the next email I send out next week with the next week's class. I'll put that link in.
Yeah, it's just an interesting read, and again, making that connection to the Bible.
Anything else? Okay. Well, get my notes here where I can see them and see everybody else. This one started off with there are all the law and everything that's in Deuteronomy is really sandwiched between chapter 11 and chapter 30. And there's two passages I stuck in the handout that I sent that were at the beginning of the section with the law in it, and the end of the section where it talks about having to choose what you want to do. And the interesting thing is that the book of Deuteronomy represents the first attempt to actually create a free society. There really wasn't much freedom going around at the time that it was written, and it's really an attempt to establish the rules for a free society. We go here. There are three issues that it brought up. One was that the first is that we're free to do what we want, that God does not take away our human responsibility. The second that is we are collectively responsible as a group of people. This was a radical concept back then, and to relate it back to, like we've been doing here, to the founding fathers of our country, that it's related to the phrase "we the people," that it's collectively the people that basically hold the responsibility for everything, and you're responsible for the common good. And the third is that it was a God-centered politic. It's about, again, we've heard this nowadays it's about the rule of law and not men. The Jews were actually the first to believe that an entire nation could govern itself in freedom with equal dignity. So any thoughts on this?
People have to feel dignity. It's, you say equal dignity. Some of them just aren't conscious about it themselves. They let the little things bring them down. So they don't. Every little thing is a tragedy in their life. Crisis. When you're just, I don't know how you get people to not feel that way. So they actually do have dignity going on, who they are. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
It's all a choice. It's all a choice. Even dignity, feeling dignity.
If this is the way the Jewish people lived, why were they so hated? Or still today?
Well, to a large degree, you have the Christian church to thank for that. If you look at the history, the Romans had a policy that if the country they were occupying had a well-established religion, they really didn't interfere with that religion. They made sure you paid your taxes and did your civic duty, and there was a little bit of worshiping the Roman gods that was attached to what you had to do to fulfill your civic duty. But as long as the Romans got their money and there wasn't any uprising going on or anything, they really left the countries that they were occupying alone, and they really didn't interfere with their religion. The reasons why the Christians were so persecuted by the Romans back in the early hundreds AD was that the Romans had a policy that the religion had to be well established. It couldn't be a brand new religion. It had to be something that had existed for years. And Christianity was brand new, so it didn't fit that criteria. So they didn't consider it the Romans didn't consider it a valid religion. But most of what we're familiar with anti-Semitism actually comes from the Christian church, basically saying that the Jews had killed Jesus and they didn't convert to Christianity, therefore they had to be either eliminated or persecuted.
Which makes no sense.
Well,
If they're living with this in mind of being a free governing body, and the fact that they're doing good for other people, yeah, I don't know.
well, back in medieval times, in order for you to have a profession, let's say you were a goldsmith or a mason or a carpenter, all of those trades had guilds, which kind of a form of a union. In other words, in order to be a goldsmith, you had to be a member of the Goldsmith Guild. So all of the various trades that people had, including uh, even agriculture, had their own guild, and you had to be a member of that guild in order to practice your profession. And the Jews were not allowed to be a member of any of the guilds, which is why they wound up dealing with lending money. And dealing with money and finances is there wasn't a guild for that. So that was really the only job that they could have. So that's how they came to be so associated with lending money and doing finances. So anything else? Okay. Let me go down here to the next segment, which is the one of the things that's interesting when you get into studying an Old Testament book is the Hebrew words that they use. Many of them don't translate directly, and you can tell an awful lot about a society in terms of what are the untranslatable words or ideas that exist within that society. And one of these in Deuteronomy that's front and center is the principle of tzedakah, which we've kind of run across before. But let me read you this passage. It's Deuteronomy 15, verse 7 through 11. If there is a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns of the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards your poor brother. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he lacks. Give generously to him and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed towards your brothers and towards the poor and the needy in your land. So let me get down here to this is one of the things that would be considered a duty that you have to another person. Uh, there are two words. Tzedakah roughly translates into justice, but there are two types, and it means both. One is what we would think of as retributive justice, which is the rule of law that settles disputes in terms of right and wrong. The other is called distributed justice, and it's is more of what Jesus used to preach about distributing wealth and make sure everybody has the same opportunity and wealth as everyone else. And if you'll recall, back in those times, the number of people that were living a subsistence level was probably 90 to 95% of the population. And with the Jews, they wanted to make sure that wealth wasn't concentrated in the hands of just a few people, that everyone should have the most basic requirements of a dignified existence. And to do this, they had something that was rather interesting. It's the concept of the Jubilee year. If you recall, we've talked about the Book of Jubilees, which is a discussion of the Jubilee years and what it actually means. But every seventh year was a Jubilee year. Every single debt was canceled. In the seventh year of service, all the Jewish slaves were set free, and all the land was turned to its original owners. So how would that affect our society today if that happened?
You'd have a lot of angry people because they'd be giving up stuff that they have and they don't want to do that.
Well, you couldn't write a loan for more than 7 years. You couldn't have any debts that went past 7 years. There was also what was called the super jubilee year, which was 7 times 7. So every roughly 50th year, everything was canceled. It's 7 times 7. So this whole practice, how would you refer to this if we were thinking about something like this today?
redistribution of wealth, and everybody gets, it's like a socialist thing.
Yeah.
People with bad business practices lose everything they have, but they get it all back in 7 years. So they get to erase, every 7 years you erase your stupid mistakes. I'm looking critical because somebody's got to be on that end of the spectrum today.
Anything else? Well, the difference between this, do we have anything like this today? Not exactly in this form, but is there anything that shares the same concept with it? How about
bankruptcy?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Bankruptcy, when people go bankrupt, they have 7 years to get their credit. They can't buy things, but they 7 years to get things back in order, and then they reestablish their credit again.
Well, I'm thinking actually more of the welfare state.
Okay.
What does the United States have in place to supposedly do something similar to this?
Would it be Medicaid?
I was thinking on that line that if you have large medical bills and you can't afford to pay them, but you continually pay X amount of money each month, showing that you're trying, that they do tend to waive it and you don't have to pay them. There's programs that do that. And that's what I was thinking in my mind.
Right. But think about Social Security and Medicare, you're actually paying for. Those are something that you pay in for. It's kind of a forced savings done by the government. You don't pay for it entirely, but you do actually have an input to it. Is there anything, I don't know if Kathy said it, Medicaid is more along this line, and that's something that people haven't paid into. Steve actually mentioned the dirty word that most people associate this with in the United States, which is socialism. If you look at the teachings of Jesus, it's very socialistic. It's leveling the playing field for everybody, which is not a terribly popular concept in the United States. We do it, but we do it grudgingly. The difference here is that with the Jews in Deuteronomy, it's instigated and done by society, not as part of the state. The government has nothing to do with it. It's all done from the individual community or the individual societies. So what would be equivalent to that today? What about everything all the churches do? Think of Mount Airy Net.
Food banks.
Food banks. Think of what happens when a hurricane or something hits, and it's not the government does indeed play a part in that, but think about all the stuff that happens in individual communities with just people going out and doing stuff.
With
So it's
Americans Purge and
charities.
Yeah. Anybody think anything else? Well, this comes from the reason why the word tzedakah can't be translated is because it brings together two concepts that in most languages are separate and opposite. And the two concepts are that of charity and justice. How are those two words opposed to each other?
charity, you're giving freely. Justice is somehow, you're not giving. Well, I don't know. Justice means they're just trying to make things right.
Well, think about an example can be helpful here. Say I give someone $100. Either that person is entitled to it or they're not. If they are entitled to it, then my act is a form of justice. In other words, I'm paying for something, but the person is entitled to that money. So in that form, it's a form of justice. If he's not entitled to it, it's an act of charity. And tzedakah is interesting in that it means both. And the reason for this is trying to figure out where I want to go here. In our country, how much is governed by the fact that something is mine?
Everything.
Yeah. You buy a car, whose is it?
Mine.
Yeah. Buy a house, whose is it?
Mine.
Actually, it's the bank's, but
That's right. I was going to say that even with the car, that it actually belongs to the bank until you pay it off.
And I mean, how much do we talk about my stuff? And and the fact that we own something. It's interesting when we went to Hawaii. The Hawaiians don't believe that you can own any property. And still in Hawaii, you can't buy, when you buy a house, you really don't own the property or the house. You're simply leasing it for a very long time. And every single beach in Hawaii is public. Even where there are huge resort hotels on the beach, and the beach is right in front of those hotels. If you went to let's say one of the Florida beaches or something, and there was a beach in front of that resort owns the beach, and people from the public aren't allowed to go on that beach, only hotel guests. But in Hawaii, the Hawaiians don't believe that anyone can own the beaches. So every single beach, including the ones in front of the hotels, are public accessible, which is rather interesting.
That makes sense because nothing really we own belongs to us. It's all God's.
Well, you just went to my next. Go ahead.
I said, God gave it to us.
And we have to take care of it.
Right.
He's lent it to us, and we're responsible for what he's given us.
And that's the whole concept here in the Jewish law in Deuteronomy is you don't really own anything. You're holding it in trust for God. Therefore, you really shouldn't be talking about, well, I don't want to give that away because it's mine. Well, it really isn't yours. It all belongs to God. And you should share it with other people. And indeed, one of the hallmarks of very early Christianity back in the 200s and 300s was that everything was held in common. When you joined a community, you gave all of your possessions to that community, and they were shared with everyone there.
So did they get that concept from the Old Testament?
Well, it's also something, remember that Jesus was a Torah observant Jew, so everything that he taught was basically from the Torah and the Old Testament. So it's hard to distinguish, if you're looking at where you want to find a reference, you can find a reference pretty much to everything that's in Deuteronomy in the teachings of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that's different here in this is the Jews believe that it's not just your material needs, it's also your psychological needs as well. So the concept of tzedakah is not only addressing someone's physical need, but also their psychological needs. And that's from verse 15:8 of Deuteronomy, be open-handed and freely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he lacks. The crucial statement there is sufficient for his needs. This means that you are commanded to maintain him, but you're not commanded to make him rich. So what would be a person's basic needs?
Food and shelter.
Anything else? Think psychological needs.
Build them up instead of tearing them down.
I was peace and love, those kinds of things.
What's the most need that we would think of in terms of in the United States? What's the most important thing that we do every day or every 5 days?
Work,
A job.
a job. Mm-hmm.
What do people get from a job?
Respect. And it's a value,
Dignity.
yeah.
And money.
But to get up in the morning and go to a job, you have a reason to get up and get going. You're doing something productive. And the Bible says you need to work and not be lazy. Can we tell the young generation this? I'm amazed all the time with the guys that work for my son, how they just, if they work and then they party, they work and they party. And I'm like, when are you guys going to grow up? You're 33 years old, no kids, no family, divorced several times, just sad.
Anything else? Well, the one thing that this means in the second part of that phrase is that which he lacks, is a relative term, but the Jews interpret it as you must be restored to your previous standard of living if something befalls you. And the Jews absolutely reject poverty as being anything good. Poverty is considered a curse. And it's something to be avoided at all costs. And it has a little phrase here from the Jewish grace that they give before meals here. It's, please, O Lord God, do not make us dependent on the gifts or loans of other people, but only on your full, open, holy, and generous hand, so that we may suffer neither shame nor humiliation forever and all time. So from their standpoint of view, that having a job would be very important, but there might be people that wouldn't accept a job from someone. So in their ideas, you have to find a way of giving it to them in a way that they would accept. The term doesn't really mean charity. It means giving people the means to live a dignified life. And any form of employment is more dignified within the Jewish value system than dependence. So that's a little bit different when we think about it. We really don't think about restoring someone to their previous position in life.
That makes you think of Job, where Job was stripped of everything and then restored.
Well, think of how we would approach a homeless person. What would we do for a homeless person? Just simply give him some food, a shelter?
I like to give him food, shelter, and then provide him with some skills so he can get a job and he can bring himself dignity to himself. We don't want
Usually
him to
train them, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, most of the more aggressive programs that are run would be to try and find them a place to live and then try and find them a job so that they can be employed and again, not just make money, but have the dignity of being employed. And you're basically looking towards their psychological needs.
Like the heifer program, where they don't just provide an animal, they teach them how to use that animal and pass it on. Use it for food or selling of eggs or whatever, like the chickens, but then they have to pass it on to someone else. So they're actually teaching them a skill and providing them with continual financing or continual way of exchanging a product for something else.
I thought of the goodwill, because they're employing people that would normally be shunned or separated. They're giving those people an opportunity. People that might have physical or mental handicaps. I think it's a very important part of our society.
criminal records that that people get an
Yeah.
opportunity to show that they can come to a job every day for 5 days a week, and they show up each week, and gives them at least a track record for the next employer to go on. Yeah.
Exactly. Because they
Well,
got to start somewhere.
And this brings us to, I think, what's unique about Judaism that passed into Christianity is that this is something that should be done by the community, not by the government. And when we look at the United States, there's a lot that the government tries to do along the lines of what we're talking about, but it's never going to be done as well as if it comes out of the community. When you think of basically how much the government can screw up just about any program with bureaucracy and everything else, the human being sometimes gets left behind. But there is a bit of this in policies like, well, you can't just be on welfare getting money for the rest of life. You have to make an attempt to go out and find a job or get a job. So there's a little bit of this in what we do.
Yeah, like unemployment, because I know that at one time in my life, because of the abuse I was receiving on a job, I had to leave that job. So I didn't have another job. And so I collected unemployment. But to receive that unemployment, I had to put out physical applications and resumes. I had to have a certain number I had to put out every single week, and I had to record that and report that information so that I could continue to get unemployment benefits. Otherwise, it's canceled. So in that respect, that is a I'm trying to think of, in terms of politically, the checks and balances. You're only going to get this benefit if you're actively searching for a job.
So if we think about this in terms of our modern society trying to implement these things, basically any program that you have, someone will find a way to fraudulently use that system.
Yeah.
And there are many people that think that that's okay because it's the government doing it, not individuals. Therefore, get as much as you can out of what you can. But think of how that's different if the rules, like in Deuteronomy, are built into the culture. If you have a culture that's trying to do this, then anyone who's trying to defraud that would
Be caught.
get outcast in that culture.
But see, I think if we had that attitude that they had, that taking care of the people in our community would be done. If we had a culture such as this, we would be taking care of our own, and we wouldn't need the federal government or state or local to control these things, that the people would be taking care of their own.
It's a good way to look at it. So what could we learn from this in terms of what we can do in our church?
Reach out to others. Help more than what we're doing now, as far as we're donating some food to the food banks, and donating some monies to help other programs, but we're not physically out there doing anything. When you look at other Methodist churches around us to see what's going on in those churches, and they may be small churches too, like the one at the end of Gillis Falls. The little church there, they have spaghetti dinners and they have food banks in that little church. And I'm surprised at what they do accomplish for being such a small church. And I know at one time we were that way, and we've gotten away from that. But I don't, I'm not a long time member, so I really don't know.
The one difference here, I think, is that the system works if it's within the congregation of your church. Think of it, the Jews are looking out for other Jews and their culture. They don't mention a whole lot of people that are outside of that culture. So something like this is feasible when it's within your own culture and within your own group of people. It becomes harder to do when you're looking at people that are on the outside. And there's not a lot said in Deuteronomy about anything that's outside Judaism.
True.
But see, I think that we need to be a culture that if we see a need, that we do something about it. If we see a need, be doers, not just throwing money at it. It's just like on my job. If I see something that needs to be done, I'm going to do it. And I think that it's the same way. And if we reach out to the unreachable, the homeless, then it's going to I can't think of how I want to say it. It's going to bring that person, hopefully, into either the church or into a belief in God, if they see that our heart is in serving God and helping them. It's going to change their life. And usually when you change someone's life like that, they want to do something to show their thanks, their gratitude. And if our church would reach out to people, it would be drawing in more people.
Well, I think the same, like Jeff says, when you go on your mission trips, that you're not to talk to them about religion, you're just to be there and
Yeah.
be that example, be that, if someone wants to talk about it, fine, but you're not there to preach and to convert people. You're just there to help them. But I think there's a point
And
where they learn something from it. They gather information from that.
right. And it's all about what this lesson, what Jeff is saying about tzedakah is meeting the physical and psychological needs. That's what we need to be looking at.
Well, I'll finish up with one of the things that we saw when we were in the Dominican Republic. The Pentecostal idea of doing this is the main problem in the Dominican Republic is unemployment. There aren't enough jobs for people. There's not enough anything really for people. And their whole idea was you go in and you set up a building or a church in a community to attempt to transform that community. And their idea is to build a community, not just a building or whatever. They're looking to go in and by having a physical presence there to transform a community. And at least there, it appears to be working somewhat. So, anything else? I think
Okay.
it's about time
Yes.
here.
Building this community. I mean, I don't want to go into in depth, but is you were saying that they don't have jobs. Does building a community help create jobs for them? Is that part of building the community?
Well, they don't really address the job part of it, but to build a sense of community, you have people helping out other people, and your job becomes more psychological and everything. They manage to take care of themselves with the little money that they have, but it gives people a purpose rather than just standing around and complaining about everything. You're working together within that group to basically lift everybody up, and they bring a reason for doing something and a reason for getting together as a group and becoming a community
It gives them purpose, in other words.
and dignity.
Yes.
FDR, after the Great Depression, put together all those programs with the WPA so that men had the opportunity to get out and do manual labor and hard work because it was good for their self-esteem and their dignity. Whereas in some part of the Great Society, it's cheaper just to hand somebody a check than it is to actually try to find them something to do and get them a job and get them a skill. I think we've lost that idea. Self-esteem doesn't come from a check. Self-esteem comes from self-worth and feeling that you've provided for your family, more so than, hey, why isn't somebody giving me stuff to help me?
And I think we'll have to end it on that note. Steve has to get over and do his thing. Hopefully everything will go well there.
I did like at the very end of this, with blessings are not measured by how much we own or earn or spend, but how much we share. That really hit home. It's like, wow, blessings aren't everything I've accumulated or a bottom line in a checkbook or savings account or anything like that. Blessings are how much I share with them.
I love that.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. Kathy, could I get you to give us a prayer before we leave?
Sure. Love to. Loving God, we just give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks that we have enjoyed this time together of learning your word and learning about the heart of God and how we can relate that to our everyday life. I thank you for the Sunday school class. And I thank you, Lord, that you will be with us this day and the rest of the week until we come together again. And we just give you all the thanks, glory, honor, and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.